Approaches to Assessment Part 3. Assessment as Learning. Assessment as Learning and its emphasis on metacognition or thinking about thinking. This assessment allows students to develop an awareness of how they learn and use that awareness to adjust and advance their learning, taking an increased responsibility for their own learning. Metacognition is the awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. The absence of metacognition connects to the research by Dunning, Johnson, Erlinger, and Kruger on why people fail to recognize their own incompetence. They found that people tend to be blissfully unaware of their own incompetence, lacking insight about deficiencies in their intellectual and social skills. Assessment as Learning emphasizes assessment as a process of metacognition or knowledge of one's own thought processes. When students become adept at monitoring what they are learning, they can use what they discover from the monitoring to make adjustments, adaptations, and even major changes in their thinking. Assessment as Learning emerges from the idea that learning is not just a matter of transferring ideas from someone who knows to someone who does not, but is an active process of cognitive restructuring that occurs when individuals interact with new ideas. Within this view of learning, for students to be actively engaged in creating their own understanding, they must learn to be critical assessors who make sense of information, relate it to prior knowledge, and use it for new learning. Assessment as Learning is based on research about how learning happens and is characterized by students reflecting on their own learning and making adjustments so that they can achieve deeper understanding. The ultimate goal in Assessment as Learning is for students to acquire the skills and the habits of mind of metacognition with increasing independence. It focuses on the explicit fostering of students' capacity to be their own best assessors, but teachers need to start by presenting and modeling external, structured opportunities for students to assess themselves. Assessment as Learning is based on the conviction that students are capable of becoming adaptable, flexible, and independent in their learning and decision-making. When teachers involve students and promote their independence, they are giving them the tools to undertake their own learning wisely and well. To become independent learners, students must develop sophisticated combination of skills, attitudes, and dispositions. Self-monitoring and evaluation are complex and difficult skills that do not develop quickly or spontaneously. Monitoring metacognition involves knowledge of cognition and regulation of cognition. Knowledge of cognition includes knowledge about ourselves as learners and what influences our performance, knowledge about our own learning strategies, and about when and why to use a strategy. Regulation of cognition includes planning, which is setting of goals and activating relevant background knowledge, regulation, which is monitoring and self-testing, and evaluation, which is appraising the products and regulatory processes of learning. The teacher's role in Assessment as Learning is to model and teach the skills of self-assessment, guide students in setting goals and monitoring their progress toward them, provide exemplars and models of good practice and quality work that reflect curriculum outcomes, work with students to develop clear criteria of good practice, and guide students in developing internal feedback or self-monitoring mechanisms to validate and question their own thinking and to become comfortable with the ambiguity and uncertainty that is inevitable in learning anything new. Teachers' role in Assessment as Learning also include providing opportunities to practice self-reflection and monitoring students' metacognitive processes as well as their learning and providing descriptive feedback, and creating an environment where it is safe for students to take chances and where support is readily available. Why do we assess using Assessment as Learning? For teachers, the purpose is to support students' independence in learning by obtaining rich and detailed information about how students are progressing in developing the habits of mind and skills to monitor, challenge, and adjust their own learning. For students, the purpose is to learn to monitor and challenge their own understanding, predict the outcomes of their current level of understanding, make reasoned decisions about their progress and difficulties, decide what else they need to know, organize and recognize ideas, check for consistency between different pieces of information, draw analogies that help them advance their understanding, and set personal goals. What to assess in assessment as learning? Basically, how students understand concepts and how they use metacognitive analysis to make adjustments to their understanding. Therefore, teachers monitor students' goal-setting process and their thinking about their learning and the strategies students use to support or challenge, adjust, and advance their own learning. What are the assessment methods for assessment as learning? A range of methods can be used as long as the methods are constructed to elicit detailed information both about students' learning and about their metacognitive processes. Teachers need to teach students how to use these methods so that they can monitor their own learning, think about where they feel secure in their learning and where they feel confused or uncertain, and decide on a learning plan. Although many assessment methods have the potential to encourage reflection and review, what matters in assessment as learning is that the methods allow students to consider their own learning in relation to models, exemplars, criteria, rubrics, frameworks, and checklists that provide images of successful learning. How can we ensure quality in the assessment as learning process? Depends on how well the assessment engages students in considering and challenging their thinking and in making judgments about their views and understanding. Teachers establish high quality by ensuring that students have the right tools and are accumulating the evidence needed to make reasonable decisions about what it is that they understand or find confusing and what else they need to do to deepen their understanding. Quality in the assessment process for assessment as learning involves taking into account reliability, reference points, validity, and record keeping. Reliability in assessment as learning is related to consistency and confidence in students' self-reflection, self-monitoring, and self-adjustment. As students practice monitoring their own learning and analyzing it in relation to what is expected, they eventually develop the skills to make consistent and reliable interpretations of their learning. In the short term, however, teachers have the responsibility of engaging students in the metacognitive processes. They do this by scaffolding students' understanding, providing criteria, exemplars, and resources to help them analyze their own work, teaching them the necessary skills to think about their own learning in relation to the prior understanding and the curricular learning outcomes, and gathering evidence about how well they are learning. The reference points in assessment as learning are a blend of curricular expectations and the individual student's understanding at an earlier point in time. Students compare their own learning over time with descriptions and examples of expected learning. In terms of validity, students should be able to assess themselves when they have a clear picture of proficient learning and the various steps that need to be taken to attain the desired expertise. Students need clear criteria and many varied examples of what good work looks like, as well as opportunities to compare their work to examples of good work. They need to reflect on their own and others' work in the context of teacher feedback and advice about what to do next. Students are the key players in record keeping as they are in all the other components of assessment as learning. They need to develop skills and attitudes that allow them to keep systematic records of their learning, and these records need to include reflections and insights as they occur. Their individual records become the evidence of their progress in learning and in becoming independent learners. Students use assessment as learning to gain knowledge about their progress, show milestones of success that are worthy of celebration, adjust their goals, and make choices about what they need to do next to move their learning forward, and advocate for themselves. Using assessment from assessment as learning involves taking into consideration feedback, differentiating learning, and reporting. Feedback is particularly important in assessment as learning. Learning is enhanced when students see the effects of what they have tried and can envision alternative strategies to understand the material. When feedback enhances understanding and provides models for independent learning, students tend to be diligent and more engaged. Although assessment as learning is designed to develop independent learning, students cannot accomplish it without the guidance and direction that comes from detailed and relevant feedback. Students need feedback to help them develop autonomy and competence. Complex skills, such as monitoring and self-regulation, become routine only when there is constant feedback and practice using the skills. Effective feedback challenges ideas, introduces additional information, offers alternative interpretations, and creates conditions for self-reflection and review of ideas. It provides students with information about their performance on a task and how they could come to the conclusions on their own. Using information from assessment as learning to differentiate learning. When assessment lies in the hands of students as well as teachers, students are practicing their own metacognitive skills of self-reflection, self-analysis, interpretation, and reorganization of knowledge. When these skills become well developed, students will be able to direct their own learning. They will have to learn to ask for support, search out new information, and reinforce or challenge their decisions by reviewing and discussing them with others. Assessment as learning provides the conditions under which students and teachers can discuss what the students are learning, what it means to do it well, what the alternatives might be for each student to advance his or her learning, what personal goals have been reached, and what more challenging goals can be set. Reporting in assessment as learning is the responsibility of students, who must learn to articulate and defend the nature and quality of their learning. When students reflect on their own learning, they need to communicate it to others, how they are intensifying their understanding, their own learning strengths, and the areas in which they need to develop further.